The glass door of the Oakmark Grand Hotel swung open, accompanied by the cold chime of the bells. The bright afternoon sunlight streamed through, blinding those in the lobby. Vanessa Claiborne entered with a calm demeanor, not seeking attention. But as soon as she stepped into the main lobby, a wave of surprise, followed by disdain, quickly spread throughout the room. The receptionist, a young woman named Amber, looked Vanessa up and down, then turned away with an air of indifference. That look, that gaze full of suspicion, was an unspoken act of judgment, even though Vanessa was just an ordinary woman, unremarkable, except for her simple attire. She wasn't wearing any expensive garments, just a light blue blouse and plain trousers. As Vanessa walked up to the reception desk, Amber continued to fidget with a pen in her hand, seemingly uninterested in looking at her, even though her computer had paused when she noticed the name in the system. "Good afternoon, how can I help you?" Amber asked, with a reluctant smile. Vanessa smiled faintly, not in a rush, but she had been waiting for this moment throughout her journey. "My name is Vanessa Claiborne. There should be a room reserved for me." Amber began typing on the keyboard, but the numbers that appeared didn't match what she expected. She looked up then, back down, her discomfort clearly visible. This name so familiar to anyone in the hospitality industry, now seemed unfamiliar to Amber. "I'm sorry, but it seems we're fully booked. Would you mind waiting for a while?" she said, trying to maintain a polite tone, though the disdain was evident in her voice. Vanessa merely smiled gently, a smile not weak but full of resolve. She had endured enough moments of being looked down upon in her life. Once a young girl with nothing but patience and self-belief, Vanessa had fought to be here, not just as a guest, but as the owner of this hotel. "Sorry, but I think you misunderstood. I'm Vanessa Claiborne, the owner of this hotel. I need access to my room." Still no recognition from Amber. She merely smirked, looking at her computer screen and muttering, "You say you own this hotel." How could I possibly believe that, in that moment, Vanessa realized that no one in this hotel, except a few at the senior level, knew about the change in ownership she had just made. Only the board and a few top executives knew that she had officially taken over the hotel. She wasn't just a guest. She was the one in charge here. Amber's disrespect didn't make Vanessa angry. On the contrary, she felt a wave of cold rise inside her. She remained as calm as always, but now was the time for everything to change. Vanessa didn't bother explaining further. She pulled out her phone and made a short call. Just 30 seconds, but it would change everything. "I'm at Oakmark Grand Hotel, and I need immediate assistance. There's an issue with the reception." After hanging up, she looked back at Amber, her eyes now cold as a still lake. Vanessa said nothing more, standing still, her gaze sweeping over the other guests around her. She felt the change in the air from unease to suspicion, to a growing sense of guilt spreading throughout the room. Moments later, Neil Dorrance, the assistant manager, appeared with a gleaming name tag on his chest. Looking at his outfit and the loosely tied tie, Vanessa realized this was someone unprepared, someone who would soon be the subject of the changes she was about to make. Neil didn't seem surprised to see her. He merely gave a fake smile. "Is there something you need?" Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She looked at Neil, then turned to Amber with calm composure. "Where's my room?" The short but firm question left no room for further explanation. At that moment, Neil realized he had made a mistake. He bowed his head and walked toward the phone. "Who is she?" he asked cautiously. When Neil returned, he brought a new set of room keys and an apology. "We made a mistake. Your room has been prepared, and we apologize for the inconvenience." The apologies were not enough to soothe the frustration in Vanessa's heart, but she simply nodded gently, saying nothing more. As she stepped into the elevator, she saw the staff around her starting to turn away, realizing that a change was taking place. Their attitude seemed to shift immediately once they knew her true identity. Vanessa entered her room without haste, without seeking attention. From the window, she looked outside where the streetlights began to fade as the darkness of the city set in. She sighed, feeling an unnamed emotion. She had come here not just to rest. She came to turn everything around, to rebuild what had been buried too long under the shiny surface of falsehood. And when others had done this to her, she would not let things continue as before. Vanessa Claiborne was not just an ordinary woman. She was the owner of Oakmark Grand Hotel, and now she would no longer allow anyone to look down on her. Vanessa stood up, walked to the window and looked outside. The city below her quietly sank into the night, its yellow lights flickering like faint stars reflected in her eyes. She felt power rising within her, but not anger or rage. It was like a storm slowly approaching, silent, with only a strong movement in the air. Throughout her life, Vanessa had fought to be recognized. She had gone through every hardship, from being a young girl with nothing but dreams to becoming the woman who owned a large hotel empire. But despite her success, she always faced discrimination, a lack of respect from those who couldn't see her true value, who judged her only by appearance or racial bias. Today, standing here, she realized that she had finally reached the point where she could change everything. The receptionists and managers she encountered didn't know who they were dealing with. They only saw a normal woman, nothing special, except for her simple attire. They couldn't see the story behind her, the fact that she had fought to get here, to no longer be someone looked down upon by others. The skeptical looks from Amber and Neil, the whispers behind her from other guests, these were all part of a game Vanessa had decided to play. A game where she would no longer be underestimated. Just one phone call, and everything would change. Not with loud words or strong emotional displays. Vanessa knew that true change didn't come from noisy actions, but from calmness, from the quiet power she held in her hands. She stood there alone, yet inside she felt the strength of an entire army. She didn't need to shout or prove anything. All it took was the truth to be revealed, and everyone would understand. While waiting, Vanessa looked at the items in her room. Everything was perfect, as if nothing could disturb the peace. She turned back to the bed, gently lying down. Her eyes closed, and in the silent space she felt each breath she took. Everything around her seemed to be beginning to change, but not from the outside. This change started from within her, from a determination never to yield, from the patience tested over many years. Sarah Cooper, her assistant, had finished her work. Every step, every action Sarah took had an impact on others. Vanessa didn't need to worry about what would happen next. In just a few minutes, everything would change. What she had planned for all this time would soon unfold. A phone rang. Vanessa opened her eyes, gently picked up the phone from the table, and saw Sarah Cooper's name on the screen. She calmly pressed the answer button. "Is everything done?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever. "It's all set, Ma'am. Everything has been rolled out as planned." Sarah replied, her voice steady. "They've received the request and everything is being processed." Vanessa didn't say anything more. She just felt the power flowing through her veins. No need for noise, no need for arguments. She had what she needed to change everything. Sarah knew that now her job was only to complete the task, but she understood that the truth Vanessa was conveying wasn't just about one simple event. This was a long-term battle where injustice had to be addressed from its roots. Oakmark Grand Hotel wasn't just a business. It was proof that a woman could change an entire system. Vanessa stood up, feeling the determination in every step she took. She wasn't just the owner of this hotel, but also the one who held the power to correct what was wrong in this society. She stepped into the hallway, the light outside the window reflecting in her eyes. Every step she took, every small action, would change the course of things. Just one phone call, and everyone would recognize who truly held the power here. Less than an hour later, the changes began to take place. Sarah had prepared everything. Every system in the hotel began to change according to the plan. The receptionists, those who had once thought Vanessa was just an ordinary guest, now realized the truth. The change didn't come from loud words, but from the quiet power of this woman. She had taken control of everything without shouting or making a scene. That was how Vanessa had not only changed this hotel, but also the way the entire system viewed power and respect. The light rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy with dampness and cold. Vanessa stood in the hotel room looking out the window. The city of Des Moines appeared in the night like a vivid painting, but nothing could shake her determination. She knew that everything would change. A quiet battle had just begun, and Vanessa would be the one to take full control. Just minutes after the phone call with Sarah, everything started to move. Every employee at the hotel had now received the new notice. Neil Dorrance, the hotel manager, was no longer in charge. Vanessa had reclaimed control of the Oakmark Grand Hotel without any argument or conflict. Everything was simply unfolding as planned. Amber, the receptionist who had initially shown indifference toward Vanessa, now realized the truth. She was no longer just a guest. She was the owner of this hotel. Vanessa was no longer someone to be looked down upon, but the one in charge of everything. As she walked down the hotel corridor, every eye turned toward her. No one dared to speak, but everyone could feel the shift in the air. Vanessa's work was not just about owning a hotel. She was changing how the hospitality industry viewed power, fairness, and the little prejudices that were simply unacceptable. She understood that changing a system wasn't something that could happen overnight, but she also knew she would be the one to lead this revolution. A revolution not loud or noisy, but strong enough to completely transform an entire industry. As the owner, Vanessa was not only in the position of making decisions, she was someone with vision, someone who understood the deeper issues and had the patience to change the smallest details. As employees started implementing the new requirements, she knew that her policies would begin to influence every aspect of the hotel. Those employees who had looked down on her would soon realize that they were the ones who needed to change. Not long after the changes were announced, Sarah reported back to Vanessa. Everyone at the hotel had received the new information, and staff had been instructed to carry out the necessary changes. The receptionists, managers, and even the security staff began to fully understand Vanessa's place in the hotel. No one could disrespect her anymore. It felt like a rising wave, but Vanessa didn't let it overwhelm her. She kept her focus more determined than ever. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. Everyone would soon realize the power she held. And when people couldn't find a reason to oppose her, They would be the ones who had to change in order to fit into the system Vanessa was creating. She began observing every department in the hotel. The employees who had once shown poor attitudes toward her were now too cautious to show indifference. She could see the change in their eyes. The feeling of seeing someone unexpectedly take control made them realize that from now on they would no longer be able to easily distinguish who had the power and who didn't. They would have to work in a completely new environment where every individual was valued equally. The night still surrounded Oakmark Grand, but Vanessa knew that the change she had started wasn't just happening within the walls of this hotel. This was the first step in a long journey to create real transformation in the hotel industry. The people here would soon realize that outdated mindsets, discrimination, or prejudice could no longer be tolerated. When Vanessa returned to her room, she no longer felt the loneliness or being left behind that she once did. Everything had changed now, and she was the one who had made that difference. She had power not because she owned a hotel, but because she had the ability to change an entire system. With the changes already implemented, Vanessa knew this battle wouldn't end easily. But she was ready. A great change had begun and no one could stop it. The light rain had stopped, but the atmosphere still carried a damp, cold feeling. Vanessa sat at the desk in her hotel room, feeling the stillness of the space surrounding her. The sounds from the hotel gradually faded as the night grew late, but inside she felt a powerful wave rising. Everything had started, and she knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. A revolution, not noisy or loud, but quietly seeping into every corner of the system. She didn't need to do anything grand or loud. Everything had been planned beforehand, and now time would prove everything. Those people she had seen, those who she had recognized the injustice in their actions, would have to realize that what they thought was safety, their small power, no longer existed. The employees she had met, those who had looked down on her now, began to feel a distinct change in the air. Though they didn't say anything from their eyes to their posture, everything reflected one thing: respect had been revived in this space. They no longer saw her as an ordinary guest. She was the one with power, and that could not be denied. Vanessa stood up from the desk and walked to the window, looking outside. The dim light from the city below reflected in her eyes, but in her mind, everything was clearer than ever. Every change she had made, every decision she had taken, was not in vain. They were beginning to have a powerful impact and spread everywhere. Not just in this hotel, but in the entire hotel industry. The system had been transformed from its very roots. The battles she had fought silently unnoticed by anyone would no longer be extinguished. She had created a new system, one where power was no longer given to those who only knew how to cling to it, but shared with those who truly deserved it. Just one phone call, just one simple decision from her, and now all those who had once looked down on her would have to learn how to change their perception. This was change not through criticism or condemnation, but by letting the truth speak for itself and assert its value. Sarah, her assistant, had been there with her, taking every step in this plan. In a short time, everything had changed. The receptionists no longer dared to show disrespect, and the managers could no longer ignore the truth. The entire system had been reset, starting from the smallest details. Vanessa felt that what she had done would have a long-lasting impact. These changes weren't just temporary. They would be built firmly and grow strong over time. And when the people here realized this, they would have to face the truth. They could no longer live in a world where discrimination and contempt still existed. She sat back at the desk, opening a document on her computer. The reports about the hotel, the customers, the employees, all reflected a clear change. Those who had once thought that power was something that could be grasped and held tight would now have to see that true power was the ability to change an entire system. And Vanessa was the one with that ability. A message from Sarah appeared on the screen. "Everything is on track, but are you ready for the next meeting?" Vanessa replied immediately. "Ready. Don't let anyone forget that we are the ones in power here." Short words, but full of determination. Vanessa knew this change wasn't just about Oakmark Grand Hotel, but about changing the entire industry. Her steps were no longer light as before, but full of confidence and power. She walked out of the room, the light from the hallway lamps reflecting off her figure. Everything had changed, and no one could stop it. Vanessa walked out the corridor, feeling each step echo in the quiet of the hotel. Every step, every glance from the staff made her more acutely aware that everything was changing. They no longer looked at her the same way. She was no longer just an anonymous guest walking in to find a room. She was the one with the power to decide, the one who would change everything. Every face of the receptionists, managers, and security guards no longer saw her as just a regular customer. She noticed the shift in the way they looked at her, in the way they behaved. The suspicion was gone. In its place was a quiet respect that they couldn't hide. They knew in this room, in this hotel, Vanessa was the one in charge. As she entered the hotel's executive office, the atmosphere became heavier than ever. Sarah, her assistant, stood waiting by the door, her gaze filled with trust and determination. They had prepared everything together, but now she understood that this was when everything truly began. The people at the top of the hotel, those who had underestimated her, those who thought they could hold on to power without facing change, were now going to face something they could never have expected. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but her eyes full of preparation for a fight that wouldn't be easy. Vanessa looked into Sarah's eyes, then glanced at the reports on the desk. Every number, every piece of data pointed to one undeniable truth. This hotel, like the entire hotel industry, was ready for change. The policies and behaviors of discrimination, whether subtle or blatant, could no longer exist in a system that was fair and transparent. And Vanessa was the one who would bring that change. She wasn't just changing Oakmark Grand Hotel. She was changing how everyone in the industry viewed power and respect. She stood up, her eyes filled with resolve. Every step she took in the hallway was no longer the step of a regular guest. She was the owner of this place, and no one could take that power away. She entered the meeting room. Every eye turned to her. The people in the room, the senior managers, no one dared look directly at her. They could feel the shift, the tension in the air. These people who had once seen her as just an ordinary customer were now about to face reality. Vanessa looked at each one of them, saying nothing, just standing there, waiting. Finally, Neil Dorrance, the hotel manager, stood up. "Vanessa, I apologize for the initial inconvenience. We misunderstood your ownership rights." Vanessa didn't respond immediately, simply nodding gently. "No need to apologize, Neil. The people in this room don't need to feel sorry. They need to change the way they work." She paused slightly, letting everyone feel the weight of her words. I want you all to understand that no one here can continue working the same way. The discrimination, the disrespect, it all ends today." Neil remained silent, his face tense. The others in the room were the same. A thick atmosphere of tension filled the room. But Vanessa didn't care. She had prepared for this moment for a long time. "The changes I'm making today are not just to ease my own feelings. They are to build a hotel where everyone, no matter who they are, is treated with equal respect." Vanessa continued, her voice firm and assured. "And I will not tolerate any more acts of discrimination. Today you will begin a new chapter, and if you cannot change, you will no longer have a place here." The room fell silent. No one dared speak. But Vanessa knew that these changes would begin immediately. The reports, the internal audits, everything had been prepared. Sarah stood behind her, nodding, confirming that everything that needed to be done was being carried out. She turned to look at all the staff in the room, her eyes meeting each one of them. "You will see the change starting today. Don't think of this as a threat. This is an opportunity for you to prove that you can work in an environment that is respectful and fair." Vanessa stood there saying no more, letting her words fill the air. She didn't need to do anything more. This change would begin on its own, spreading from the people in this room to the entire system. As she left the room, she felt like everything had fallen into place. The receptionists looked at her with different eyes, recognizing the change that couldn't be denied. And from now on, they would no longer dare to look down on Vanessa, no longer seeing her as just an ordinary guest. Vanessa's steps were steady, no longer those of a weak person. She was the one creating change, and no one could stop that. Vanessa walked out of the meeting room without a word or exchange with the others. She didn't need any confirmation or thanks. Everything was clear, and she had done what needed to be done. The people in the meeting room remained silent, as if they hadn't fully grasped the change, hadn't fully understood that what they once thought was power and control was now in the hands of someone else. Vanessa's steps down the hotel corridor were deliberate. Every step she took marked a profound change happening in the lives of those around her. None of them, from the staff to the managers, could deny the truth that she was no longer just an anonymous guest walking into this hotel. She was the one in charge, the one with the authority to steer everything, and those who couldn't adapt to the new demands would be eliminated. This was inevitable. As she stepped into the elevator, Vanessa felt an odd sense of relief. It was the feeling of knowing she had done the right thing, even if others wouldn't immediately understand. She looked at her reflection in the elevator mirror, a calm but strong woman. The faint light reflected in her eyes, and she felt that she was no longer obscured by prejudice or disrespect. When the elevator doors opened, Vanessa stepped out and walked straight to her room. She didn't look around, didn't stop to greet anyone. Everyone here had been given the chance to change, and if they couldn't, that was their problem. She didn't need to explain any more. The change would speak for itself. She had embarked on this journey not to seek agreement or acceptance from everyone, but to create a system based on fairness and respect, where everyone could recognize their true value without relying on baseless discrimination. She sat down on the chair, relaxing a bit after the long day, but her mind couldn't stop thinking about what was to come. Everything had been set in motion, and now it was time to wait and see the results of the changes she had initiated. She wasn't concerned about rumors, nor worried about what people would think. These changes were something she had carefully planned for a long time, and she understood that when change begins, it spreads like a powerful wave, unstoppable. Those who refused to change would be left behind, and the rest would have to learn how to accept a new set of rules, a new way of working. No one could live forever in the shadow of discrimination and social stratification. Everyone had value, and she would be the one to make them see that. She looked out the window where the city lights still shone, twinkling like stars in the night sky. To many it was just an ordinary scene, but to Vanessa it symbolized unexplored possibilities, untapped opportunities. She had stood up, changed everything from this very room, and now she wouldn't stop. She had come here to do something even greater, not just for herself, but for all those who had never had the chance to see their value in this society. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Sarah, her assistant. "Have you received the information from the rooms?" Sarah asked, her voice now calm, no longer tense. Sarah had always been the one to help her keep everything under control, and now it seemed that everyone was following Vanessa's lead. "It's done," Vanessa replied shortly. "Everything's been implemented. Now we just wait for the response from them." Sarah laughed softly. "You don't have to worry. They won't be able to stop this change." Vanessa placed the phone down and leaned back in her chair. She knew what was coming. The meetings, the changes in the system would unfold quickly. She wasn't just changing Oakmar Grand Hotel. She was changing the entire hotel industry. The staff who had once looked down on her would now have to reconsider everything. She had taken control of everything without exerting force. No need for public displays of power. All she needed was to prove that the truth would always prevail, and all discrimination would end. As night fell, the space in her room grew quiet, and Vanessa sat silently feeling the power of change, gradually filling the air around her. Everything had completely changed. What had started as a personal battle had now become a fight for everyone in this system. She was not only the owner of this hotel, but she was the one who had created systemic change. The next morning, Sarah came to meet her with a detailed report on the situation. Everything was proceeding as planned. The changes had been immediately applied, and the staff had started to recognize the shift in their work. Vanessa looked at the numbers and reports, her face showing no emotion, but inside, she knew this was just the beginning. She smiled not with pride, but because she knew the bigger journey was still ahead. Step by step, with certainty and an unstoppable momentum, she would change an entire profession so that people like her, those who had been looked down upon, could be recognized for their true worth. She knew there would be many challenges ahead, but there would also be countless opportunities, and she would be the one to lead the way, the one to change everything. Vanessa sat still in the room, the light from the window casting over her face, a clear sign of the change she had begun. Everything in the hotel now seemed quiet, but deep inside, a quiet fire was burning. She could feel the tension in the air, the clear shift in how each staff member behaved, even if they didn't speak a word. They knew that everything had changed. She stood up, looked out the window where the city lights still flickered, but now those lights seemed to reflect something much larger. She wasn't a woman here to rest or seek comfort. She was the one creating the change. And now she wasn't just going to change a hotel, she was going to change an entire industry. The change wasn't going to come from noise or attention-seeking actions, but from small but resolute decisions. Sarah, who had always stood by Vanessa, entered the room with a clear sense of confidence. She had been the one helping Vanessa plan everything that was about to unfold. They had prepared everything in advance, and now it was time for everyone in the hotel to recognize the undeniable power Vanessa now held. "Have you received all the reports?" Sarah asked, her voice as calm as always. Vanessa nodded. "It's all done. Everything went as planned. The people in the hotel will have to understand that they can't continue living in the illusion of power and discrimination. The system will restructure itself from within." Sarah smiled. She knew that although Vanessa hadn't said it, those words weren't just a declaration. They were a commitment. A commitment that the change Vanessa was bringing wouldn't just be temporary, it would be a long-lasting change, not only in Oakmark Grand Hotel, but in the entire hotel industry, where discrimination and injustice had always existed in the shadows. "The team has already started implementing the changes," Sarah continued. "But I think these changes won't stop here. We need to keep monitoring and ensure that there's no backslide into old policies and attitudes." Vanessa smiled, her gaze unwavering. "That's right, but we can't just change things on the surface. All employees from reception to management need to learn to respect and work for the common good. We need to create a new work culture where every individual feels valued, regardless of race, skin color, or any other external factor." Sarah nodded, jotting notes in her notebook. "Got it. And one more thing, have you planned the meeting with the board of directors?" Vanessa looked at her watch, then turned to Sarah, her gaze full of resolve. "It's time for them to listen to me. They won't just hear about the decisions, they will witness what's happening. The meeting with the board of directors would be an opportunity for Vanessa to affirm that the change couldn't just remain in a small part, but had to spread throughout the organization. Starting today, no one would be allowed to continue maintaining discrimination, whether in speech or action. When Vanessa entered the boardroom, the members of the board were already present. The light from the overhead lamps illuminated their tense faces, their eyes turning toward her with curiosity and a hint of concern. They couldn't have known that the woman they once saw as an ordinary guest was the one who owned the entire hotel. Vanessa didn't rush walking into the room with calm composure. She stood before the table, her gaze not passing over each individual, but rather taking in the entire room with confidence. She didn't need to speak much. Every word she said would be a powerful statement of what was to come. We can no longer live in the shadow of outdated policies and discrimination. That's why I'm here today, Vanessa began, her voice echoing throughout the room. This change doesn't come from one individual, but from restructuring the entire system. And everyone in this room, from management to staff, will need to change how they view power. Every word Vanessa spoke carried weight, not because she was trying to convince anyone, but because she knew that what she said was the truth. The people in the room couldn't deny it. They could no longer live in an old system where discrimination still existed. She was going to make them change. She paused for a moment, allowing her words to sink in. Then she continued, her tone stronger. As the owner of this hotel, I will no longer tolerate any acts of discrimination. These changes begin here today. And I require each of you to implement this, not for me, but for the fairness and respect that we need to build. In the boardroom, the atmosphere grew tense. No one dared argue with her. They understood that Vanessa wasn't just a leader. She was the one who would change the entire system. What she said were decisions they couldn't avoid. When the meeting ended, Vanessa walked out of the room, feeling a wave of satisfaction rising inside her. She knew that whether the board members accepted it or not, change was coming. She had taken control of Oakmark Grand Hotel, and now she was going to take control of the entire hotel industry. The feeling of satisfaction didn't come from having power in her hands. It came from knowing that she had made those around her realize that true power wasn't something that could be taken away by prejudice or discrimination. True power was the ability to change, the ability to create an environment where everyone was respected, no matter who they were. Vanessa walked out of the meeting room with a steady stride, not saying a word to anyone. The feeling she had was not relief or comfort, but rather that of someone who had just completed an important battle, a battle not just for herself, but for all those who had been forgotten and looked down upon. As she passed through the hallway, the eyes of the staff couldn't avoid the shift. They couldn't help but notice, couldn't help but feel that change was sweeping through everything around them. They no longer looked at her with unfamiliarity or disdain. She was no longer just a regular guest, she was the one in charge of the place. The receptionists who had once been cold or even distant now stood tall and looked at her with respect. This feeling wasn't just a change in attitude, it was a newfound awareness. Vanessa knew this wasn't the end, but just the beginning of a long journey ahead. A journey that would bring many challenges, but also great opportunities. She couldn't help but think about everything that had happened in the meeting. Every word she spoke, every decision she made carried a strong message. This change wasn't a noisy rebellion, it was a quiet, decisive revolution. The board members might not understand immediately, but they would see there was no denying it, that she had taken control of everything, not through the power of money or position, but through her mindset and vision. When she returned to her room, everything was calm, but inside it felt like a wave was rising. She sat down, looking out the window at the city beneath the dark night. Vanessa felt the stillness, a stillness filled with strength. Everything had begun to change, and she was the first to stand up and claim the power she rightfully deserved. She didn't need to prove anything anymore. She didn't need to wait for acceptance or approval from anyone. The changes she had made would stand on their own and prove their worth. A message from Sarah appeared on her phone, a report on the hotel's situation after the meeting. "Everything is on track, Ma'am. The staff has been informed about the changes, and we've already started planning the retraining." She read the message and couldn't help but smile. What she had done wasn't about creating turmoil, but about starting a new phase one, where everyone understood that respect and fairness were the foundations of a sustainable work environment. Sarah had been a trusted companion to Vanessa, always standing by her side through important decisions. Those decisions weren't always easy, but it was Sarah who helped her maintain her belief and stick to her goals. She knew that no matter what Vanessa did, no matter how quickly or slowly the change came, it would yield lasting results. With careful preparation and strong determination, Vanessa had created a wave that couldn't be reversed. The people at the hotel, no matter how they reacted, couldn't stop this change. She had taken control, not through confrontation, but through decisiveness, through calmness in every step she took. She wouldn't let anyone undermine the fairness she was creating. The old staff would have to change the way they worked and how they viewed others, and those who couldn't change would have to leave. Not long after she received a call from Neil Dorrance. His voice was a little flustered, but he tried to remain calm. Vanessa, I've received instructions from the board. We'll begin restructuring the HR department immediately and implement training on fairness in the workplace. Vanessa could sense the confusion in Neil's voice. She wasn't someone easily shaken, but she understood that people needed time to adapt to change. Neil, I hope everyone will understand that this change isn't optional, it's a requirement. Those who can't work in this environment will need to find somewhere else to work. Sarah stood by her side, listening to the call without intervening. She knew Vanessa was doing the right thing. Her words weren't just to assert power, but to build a more fair and efficient system. "You're going to change everything from the ground up, right?" Sarah asked, when the call ended. Vanessa smiled at her, her gaze full of confidence. "Yes, Sarah. This isn't just about changing a few departments. It's about changing the whole system. What I want is a hotel where everyone can feel respected and have the opportunity to grow. And that's how I'll change everything from the inside out." She looked out the window once again, feeling the cool air from outside, but inside she felt warmth. She had started this journey not for personal goals, but for fairness, for the true value of those who had been looked down upon and forgotten in this system. And Vanessa would be the one to bring that change, no matter how long it took. She knew the long journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but just by looking at the numbers, the feedback from the staff and customers, she could feel the change starting to appear. She wouldn't stop until everyone in this hotel industry recognized that discrimination had no place in the world she was creating. Vanessa stood up from her chair, the light from the computer screen reflecting off her face, creating a powerful wave inside her. She looked at the final reports that Sarah had prepared. The data on the screen was not just numbers, it was proof of the changes she had begun. Every line, every small detail showed that everything was moving in the right direction. The hotel staff, no matter how much they tried to avoid it or resist, could not hide the truth that this system had already begun to change completely. She stood up, not in a hurry, but with each step echoing through the quiet space. The feeling she had the confidence in every movement was the result of decisions that had been made long ago. What Vanessa wanted was a fair system where everyone had the opportunity to grow and no one was excluded because of unreasonable discrimination. She wasn't the first to fight for fairness, but she would be the one to create permanent change. No longer just empty words or endless meetings with no results. Vanessa had proven that real change could happen, starting with the smallest actions, from every phone call and every meeting. She didn't need to wield power or influence, she only needed to be strong and resolute in her goals. This would affect not just the hotel, but the larger society as well. Sarah walked over her gaze, full of pride. "You did it, Vanessa. The staff has been informed about the changes, and everything will begin tomorrow." Vanessa nodded, her eyes still fixed on the screen, but not to check the numbers, rather, to understand something bigger. She was standing at an important milestone, not just for herself, but for a community that longed for respect and recognition. "We're not just working to achieve profits or personal success," Vanessa said, her voice firm. "We're working to create an environment where everyone feels valued, and I won't stop until that becomes a reality." Sarah stood silently for a moment, then smiled as if she understood the message she had just received. She knew that Vanessa's words weren't just a goal, but a principle she was living by. Vanessa hadn't just brought change to Oakmark Grand Hotel, she had brought it to the entire industry, to workers at every level, from receptionists to managers, those who had been overlooked and disrespected. The feeling Vanessa had now wasn't satisfaction from achieving success, but a sense of energy and unwavering determination. She wasn't just standing strong in power, she was building a new foundation, one where fairness and respect would guide everything. Those who had once ignored their own worth would now have to learn to assert themselves. The entire system had been reset. Those who held on to old, outdated beliefs would be automatically left behind, and those who hadn't yet recognized the change would gradually be left out. Not through threats or hostility, but through firmness and the strength that came from within. A call from Neil Dorrance came in, but this time his voice was no longer tense or doubtful. "Vanessa, I've received instructions from the top. We'll start making the changes immediately. The departments have also been asked to prepare for the restructuring process." Vanessa smiled slightly, not out of self-satisfaction, but because she knew everything was moving in the right direction. People like Neil wouldn't be able to stop the process. They couldn't stop the change she had initiated. "Exactly," she said, her voice calm. "You'll begin the changes today, and if they can't adapt, they won't have a place here. That's what I expect from all of you." The call ended, but Vanessa didn't feel relieved. She felt the weight of the significance of what she had done. Everything would not only change within Oakmark Grand Hotel, but it would spread beyond that. Old employees would not be able to stay if they didn't change their way of thinking and working. Just by looking at the numbers, the feedback from customers, she knew that things were already beginning to shift. This change was irreversible. Sarah entered the room and handed Vanessa a new report. "See, what you started is only the first step. People are changing." Vanessa looked at the report. The numbers, the feedback from customers, all carried a strong message. Everything had changed. Not a small change, but a complete transformation. And this would only be the first step in a long journey where fairness would become the new standard. "We've just begun," Vanessa said, smiling once again. "Let those who can't adapt be left behind. The rest we will build a fair system where everyone can grow." Sarah nodded, knowing that Vanessa had not only changed a hotel, she had changed the way the entire industry would view the value of every individual without discrimination, without injustice. And all they had to do was learn how to work in an environment where respect was the key factor. As she stepped outside, Vanessa felt a strong sense of confidence. Every step she took, every decision she made, was a statement she had created undeniable change. Vanessa walked through the familiar halls of Oakmark Grand Hotel, but this time, each step she took felt different. Every step seemed to mark a new chapter, a new era, not just for the hotel, but for an entire industry. She knew that after the decisions she had made, nothing could ever go back to the way it was. The feeling she had wasn't one of complacency, but of certainty, a feeling that she was doing what was right, something that no one had dared to do before. She looked at the reception staff, all of them showing a different attitude compared to before. Though no one said a word, she could feel the change subtly taking place in the air. They no longer looked at her with unfamiliarity or disdain. She was no longer just an ordinary guest. She was the one in charge of this place. The receptionists who had once been indifferent or even dismissive now stood tall and looked at her with respect. This wasn't just a change in attitude, but a shift in awareness. Vanessa knew this wasn't the end, but only the beginning of a long journey ahead. a journey that would bring many challenges, but also great opportunities. She couldn't help but think of everything that had happened in the meeting. Every word she spoke, every decision she made carried a powerful message. This change wasn't a noisy rebellion, but a quiet, decisive revolution. The board members might not understand immediately, but they would see, and there would be no denying it, that she had taken control of everything, not through the power of money or position, but through her mindset and vision. When she returned to her room, everything remained peaceful, but inside it felt as though a wave was rising. She sat down, looking out the window at the city, now immersed in the dark of the night. Vanessa felt the stillness, a stillness filled with power. Everything had begun to change, and she was the first to stand up and claim the power she truly deserved. She no longer needed to prove anything. She didn't need to wait for acceptance or approval from anyone. The changes she had made would speak for themselves and prove their worth. A message from Sarah appeared on her phone, a report on the hotel's situation after the meeting. "Everything is on track, Ma'am. The staff has been informed of the changes, and we've already begun planning the retraining." She read the message and couldn't help but smile. What she had done wasn't about creating chaos, but about starting a new phase, a phase where everyone understood that respect and fairness were the foundations of a sustainable work environment. Sarah had been a reliable companion to Vanessa, always standing behind her in making important decisions. Those decisions weren't always easy, but it was Sarah who helped her stay strong in her belief and firm in her goals. She knew that no matter what Vanessa did, whether the change came quickly or slowly, it would yield lasting results. With careful preparation and strong determination, Vanessa had created an irreversible wave. The people at the hotel, no matter how they reacted, couldn't stop this change. She had taken control not through confrontation, but through decisiveness, through calmness in every step she took. She wouldn't let anyone undermine the fairness she was creating. Old staff would have to change their way of thinking and working, and those who couldn't change would have to leave. Not long after, she received a call from Neil Dorrance. His voice was no longer tense or doubtful. "Vanessa, I've received instructions from the board. We'll start making the changes immediately. The departments have also been asked to prepare for the restructuring process." Vanessa smiled slightly, not out of self-satisfaction, but because she knew everything was on the right track. People like Neil wouldn't be able to stop this process. They couldn't stop the change she had initiated. "Exactly," she said, her voice calm. "You'll begin the changes today, and if they can't adapt, they won't have a place here. That's what I expect from all of you." The call ended, but Vanessa didn't feel relieved. She felt the weight of the significance of what she had done. Everything would not only change within Oakmark Grand Hotel, but it would spread beyond that. Old employees would not be able to stay if they didn't change their way of thinking and working. Just by looking at the numbers, the feedback from customers, she knew things were already beginning to shift. This change was irreversible. Sarah entered the room and handed Vanessa a new report. "See, what you started is only the first step. People are changing." Vanessa looked at the report. The numbers, the feedback from customers all carried a strong message. Everything had changed. Not a small change, but a complete transformation. And this would only be the first step in a long journey where fairness would become the new standard. "We've just begun," Vanessa said, smiling once again. "Let those who can't adapt be left behind." The rest we will build a fair system where everyone can grow." Sarah nodded, knowing that Vanessa had not only changed a hotel, she had changed the way the entire industry would view the value of every individual without discrimination, without injustice. And all they had to do was learn how to work in an environment where respect was the key factor. As she stepped outside, Vanessa felt a strong sense of confidence. Every step she took, every decision she made, was a statement she had created undeniable change. Vanessa Claiborne's journey is not just the story of a woman who triumphed in the hotel industry, but also a testament to the power of determination and respect. It is only when we stand up to face the injustices, when we firmly defend the value of ourselves and those around us, that true change can take place. Vanessa is not only a successful CEO, she is a person who creates change and inspiration for those who believe in justice and fairness in both work and life. We all have the power to change, whether in our work or personal lives. Change doesn't start with loud actions or attention-grabbing moves, but with steadfast decisions, small but determined actions. Vanessa did this, and she showed that any system, no matter how powerful, can be changed if we dare to face the truth and remain committed to our goals. If this story has inspired you, please click like and subscribe so you don't miss the upcoming stories about the power of justice and change. Together we can create a world where respect and fairness are the most solid foundations. Leave a comment with the phrase, "The change." If you believe that no matter where we are, we can all be the ones to create a difference,